some people it is circumstantial. So the way I always look at it is if you don't have an unhealthy relationship or dependence or misuse of drugs or alcohol, and it's suddenly presenting right now, but you really believe that you're not someone who needs AA, or you're not someone who needs to be sober forever or address it as like an alcoholic problem. Imagine if there were consequences if you drank in less than 6 months. You're going to end up divorced, or you're going to lose your kids, or you're going to lose your career, or you're not going to be there when your mother's in the hospital. Someone who doesn't have a dependence, it might get uncomfortable, but they'd be able to make it the 6 months.
Well, hello there, and welcome to this episode of the Terri Cole Show. It's a very special episode because I am talking to sober coach Patty Powers. Now, Patty is someone that I've worked with professionally, meaning I've referred clients, we've shared clients for many, many years. But also Patty is someone who has helped someone in my family, someone very dear, when they relapse. And she does an unbelievable job. She has been sober from heroin addiction for 33 years. And Patty makes recovery accessible. So I wanted her to come back on the show because a lot of you have been emailing me and putting questions on all the social media platforms about your own use post-pandemic. So many of you are wondering, is your use an issue? Whether it's drinking, many people are smoking weed every day or eating gummies every night. And your real question is it normal? Do I need more help? What is going on in my life? And so I just asked Patty to come back on so I can ask her all of the questions that you asked me. So I hope that you enjoy this interview with my friend and sober coach, Patty Powers, as much as I enjoyed spending time with her. I'm super excited to welcome sober coach Patty Powers back to the Terri Cole Show. Hey, Patty, thanks for coming back.
Hey, lady in red, you look fantastic.
Well, thanks. I'm ready. This time of year, Patty, so many people are writing to me about their own use. So I thought it was a perfect time for you to come back on the show. We did a show that was super popular. So many people wrote in after the last time you were on the show, how helpful it was. And I know that some people actually reached out to you to become clients of yours. So I just figured this is the time. And I started again, same thing as last year, started getting this increase in questions. And one of the biggest questions that I'm getting is, how do I know if it could be alcohol or drug use? Because a lot of people are like, I'm smoking more weed for my anxiety. How can I tell if it's a problem? So what do you say to that?
I always wonder when people say it's for my anxiety, whether it's like a prescription that they got during COVID or gummies or weed or a glass of wine, that they haven't really made any effort or taken any other actions that might actually help lower their anxiety first.
Right.
That's always the first one. And it kind of makes its own gravy, because if you get used to treating anxiety with an immediate change comes over you. So the only thing that makes an immediate change is when you consume something. You don't go to the gym once and come out with abs. You know what I mean?
Right.
So to get rid of it, there's anxiety about the possibility of future anxiety that isn't even real in that moment, so then it just kind of heightens it. So, taking actions to see, like, what is the anxiety baseline really? Now that we've moved through those treacherous, like terrifying periods pre-vaccine COVID, and life has kind of come back. It's like if you become psychologically dependent on taking something to address your feelings, it's very frightening to imagine life without it. But you don't know if you really need it anymore until you take some actions to address them in other ways, Yeah. That's why when I'm working with people, there'll be some people where they might give me their whole backstory of their use and their family history and take it all back and say, oh, it's not a problem. I just need to do a spring cleanse or sober October. And I'm not like I'm going to teach you how to drink in a controlled manner coach. That's kind of not what my title is. So complete abstinence whenever someone's working with me so that they can gain that experience, because we can't really gauge what's working and what's not working to feel better if something is already taking the edge off. If that makes sense.
Yeah,
And
it does. I used to do this with clients where this was long before there was a sober October. When I was seeing a lot of therapy clients, I would do a May cleanse, right? And it could be from whatever it is that they felt like they were doing too much of, whether it was sugar, whether it was carbs. A lot of times, though, because this was most of my clientele back then were Broadway performers, and they were all young, like most of them under the age of 25. And they lived this life of drinking every night. I always wanted to introduce it in a non-threatening way so that they would feel like I wasn't accusing anyone of anything, right? Because they were going to work and doing their thing. But I always knew who had the problems, back to the question that that person asked, the ones who couldn't even consider doing a 28-day cleanse from drinking, let's say, because drinking was really the main thing that my Broadway population, that was like their drug of choice, so to speak. And the ones who were like, I can't do it, they really knew. And I was like, okay, well, this is probably something deeper, because for a lot of them, it was circumstantial. And what did you see during the pandemic of people having accelerated circumstantial use because we're locked down or whatever?
it was a little trickier during that period because a lot of things would present as alcoholism. And, let's go back a year before COVID, it would be going in, living with them, whatever, to address it in that context. But then when suddenly it's like, well, my history hasn't shown this. I only got in trouble. There were only consequences during COVID. But it's also during COVID, it's the only time that you don't have anywhere to hide either, right? So you're really around people who might not have noticed before. It's like being a sleuth. Like, what is circumstantial? Because if you were to go into a detox, or someone checking into detox who just keeps saying, I'm not an alcoholic, or I don't have a drug problem, like over and over, but they're there. Generally, the people who say that have one, right? But not everyone. So when people start getting, I'm the type of person that if somebody tells me not to do something, it's my personality to suddenly want to do it. And you go, that makes sense to you. And that would make sense to a 15-year-old. And that would make sense to an addict. But it doesn't make sense in the adult world where we have agency over our actions, right? So you just have to find out, so in some cases it would look one way, but then as more was revealed, it would be, well, this happened. And then COVID happened, and could long haul COVID, which can present as higher anxiety, be part of this. Or so I'd work with a psychiatrist or work with a therapist to just try to tease it out, because I would never want to underserve someone.
Right.
Not every, but some people it is circumstantial. So the way I always look at it is, if you don't have an unhealthy relationship or dependence or misuse, the language always changes, misuse of drugs or alcohol, and it's suddenly presenting right now, but you really believe that you're not someone who needs AA, or you're not someone who needs to be sober forever or address it as like an alcoholic problem, then imagine if there were consequences if you drank in less than 6 months. If you were to tell someone you're going to end up divorced, or you're going to lose your kids, or you're going to lose your career, or you're not going to be there when your mother's in the hospital, something really important. Someone who doesn't have a dependence, it might get uncomfortable, but they'd be able to make it the 6 months. So what I'll see is somebody will do something where we're working together for 90 days, maybe by Zoom, an email. The commitment is no substances during that time. We're just going to use other things and see where we land, in terms of managing feelings and feeling better over time, because I can gauge it over time, because it does get better over time when you're actually addressing what's going on. A lot of them can't even make it 90 days. They will cheat before the 90 days. And these are people who swear up and down it is not that. So to go 6 months, like even ones that I've been with where it's like starts out as like, I'm not Amy Winehouse, to I'm just going to do a spring cleanse, to this feels great, I want to do this for a year. Day 91, the compulsion to just, have a glass of wine to celebrate 91 days. And it comes out of nowhere. So some people, it's like along the way, they start feeling good and they go, I'm going to do this for 6 months. It's not like a commitment. I'm not calling myself an alcoholic. I'm not identifying that way. I just want to see where I land in 6 months. A lot of times they'll just have the desire to continue. And if it turns out that they're not dependent, they might go back to try it and see if their relationship to it's different. And if it turns out that it's not different, they can come back and we can kind of do a refresher. And some people, if it looks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it's a duck, right? But sometimes it's not.
In the circumstantial stuff, though, there was something that happened with me and one of my clients over the pandemic was where she was drinking more. And she was a pretty long-term client. So I knew she didn't really have this history of addiction. Like I knew that she drank socially, but it really wasn't a problem. She had a big career. She was married, had kids. And so she started really hyper focusing on the fact that in the beginning of the pandemic, it was sort of like, wow, it's sort of like I'm on vacation and I can drink and I'm kind of drinking a lot. I kind of got to watch it. I got to watch it. And then she started coming in and wanting me to hold her accountable to not drink during the week. She only wanted to drink on the weekends. I was like, okay. I mean, I can support you in that. I don't know if I can't make you not do it. And then she kept failing. So for 2 weeks in a row, she came in and she was ashamed. And she was like, I only made it to Monday this week, or I only made it to Tuesday. And then I drank because my friends came over. And I was like, okay, now this is like a distraction pain. We're focusing on the wrong thing. I was thinking from a psychological point of view, there is some secondary gain that she's getting by doing what she's doing. So let's see, what is that? And when I asked the secondary gain question, so what do you get to not face, not feel, not experience by drinking every night of the week, 3 or 4 glasses of wine? She immediately said, I get to not face the state of my marriage. And I was like, so we should be talking about the state of your marriage. Obviously, that's what we should be talking about. And we did. But in that instance, when I didn't have any evidence that she had this history, because I saw this with multiple clients over the pandemic where there was more use. And then the real question, and you and I have talked about this before ourselves, because we're friends, that is what happens after that crisis is sort of over. So what are your thoughts about that? So people maybe used gummies or alcohol throughout the pandemic to sort of soothe over the fear that we were all had pre-vax and all the things. But what should people be looking out for now?
Because you and I have talked about shadow addiction. I would get people writing to me I don't know if I really understand what that is. Is it different than addiction? It feels like there's this sliding scale, right? And so there are people who in a crisis might turn to during a breakup or summer vacation because they've gone to Europe and they're 22 and it's their first time ever and they're just going to let loose and don't continue it when they get back. They just kind of mature it out is how they describe it, right? And then there are people who go into the crisis and it just becomes frightening to imagine having feelings without that pacifier. So then it becomes harder to let go of, especially with high functioning clients, like the clients that you have. They really keep it together and they can police themselves to some degree, of okay, this is getting a little messy. I'm going to leave now. But what'll happen, like what you're describing with the one who kept being failing herself and not being able to make it to the weekend, is it's that relationship you have with yourself. And if you can master the universe, but you can't master any kind of control over this, it indicates that that period of your life where you might be over. It doesn't mean that you are, ready to go downstairs into a church basement with a bunch of people every night of the week.
Right.
But chances are, if you don't get off the ride, fast forward 10 years, 5 years, 3 years, you could be in that basement. So I feel like with shadow addiction, it would be like addict light, alcoholic light, Pepsi light. You might go back after a period of time and test the waters to see if that applied to you or not. And if you notice that I'm having a drink on Friday, but I'm just thinking about how many hours until Friday comes all week long. That is, I'm noticing that. So I'm going to talk about that before that becomes so normal, I don't notice it anymore. Right. If you continue, it'll go back to where you came in when we met in the first place, right? If they've dealt with whatever the situations were, dealt with the troubled marriage, they dealt with their anxiety, and they're going to just see, maybe I don't have shallow addiction, maybe it was circumstantial, and they try it, and then they discover that that didn't work. Right. And for the ones that it did work, they still gained by having a period of time to just experience life without a buffer, because they know they can do it, and they know that they survived their emotions.
Yeah, you had said to me once about when I had asked you this, because I was getting these questions. We were talking the other night, and these questions were coming in, and you had said something that really resonated with me about, how do you know if there's a problem? And you basically said it's almost like a secret with yourself. Like other people may not see it as a problem because you're so high functioning, but you have regret. You wish that you would stop at 1 glass of wine, but you end up having 4, or eating carbs, or whatever the thing is. That really stuck with me because my crew is high functioning. That's why I'm writing a book on high functioning codependency, because people look at us like, well, if she's got it all together, she's the one. But when it's just you and you, when you're looking in the mirror, you know that you're drinking or consuming more than you want to, or more than you plan to. Just like my client who said, I'm not going to drink during the week, and then kept doing that. Now, she happened to be in therapy, so we were able to talk about that and go, okay, so what is underneath that? But if you're listening to this, if you're watching this on YouTube and you're identifying with that, you've got a secret room in your mind that only you know what's really going on with you. It makes it so much easier to sort of deny there's a problem, right?
I always think people can identify with this because most people at some point in their life have had that relationship that just starts out, you feel swept away, and like you feel more together than you are separate. You're just at your best and you're energized, and it's just like everything is great. And then the relationship continues and it becomes real, and you still love one another, but that high is gone. And then there start to be some problems, and maybe the problems aren't solvable. Maybe you've tried working on them and they're not. So now you're in a relationship that inside you keep feeling like, I have to leave this. This isn't working. We've tried everything. It's not going to change. I keep thinking it's going to change, but it's been another 6 months and I'm still here. And what happens is you have a day where you're out together and it feels like it felt in the beginning. And that's all it takes to keep you in for another 8 months. It's the hope that it's going to go back to the way it was, right? And with people who have any kind of relationship to a substance, whatever it is, whether you got it from your doctor and like question, do I really even need this anymore? Or my dose is double from what I started a year ago. Like, was that necessary? I'm not going to tell my doctor, I'm not going to change it, but I'm questioning, was it necessary? Right. So that relationship's similar, because the idea that it's going to go back to how it was, that it's going to go back to being able to leave the opening after 2 glasses of wine, that it's going to be able to be away on the weekend and you didn't get to refill your prescription, but you're not canceling all your plans because, like, you can't imagine getting on a plane without, your Xanax, you're going to cancel everything. Like, suddenly when the relationship is that entwined, the idea of leaving it, there's a lot of grief that comes up and a lot of fear, because you start to believe that it was terrible before it came along. And what I find with clients is that, like, they might not talk about that, but I know they're thinking it. But then they start to say things like, I feel really good. Like, they forgot that they didn't feel absolutely miserable before it came along as a permanent feeling, right? The idea that they can be happy without it.
Kind of amazing. I remember when I stopped drinking when I was in my early 20s, how mind-blowing it was to me to not be hungover every day. I had been hungover so many days in a row for so long that that was a normal state of being, where you just drink a lot of coffee, hydrate like crazy and get through it. And then you're going to do that whole cycle over again. And I just remember being like, wow, this is what it feels like to be wide awake with my eyes wide open in my life. But that the dopamine that was being generated just from being alive, like I just remember that so distinctly. So I really resonate with what you're saying about my first initial thought when I stopped drinking when I was younger was, I remember saying to my therapist, what the hell do people talk about? So you're telling me I'm not drinking anymore in my life, that's what you want. So I want to know, what do people do on New Year's? What do you do at a barbecue? What do you do on Sunday? Like, because
The
everything
wedding
was
2 years from now. 2 years from now. Like I'll hear that. Like, but what about that toast at that wedding I'm going to in 2.5 years? And it's just like,
like I've been toasting at
right now you're
weddings
safe.
with seltzer for 28 years. It's perfectly fine. It's all good. But again, it is a change in your mindset. So over the years, I mean, part of, you and I became friends years ago, and we've shared many clients since then. So I always will send clients to you who are either sober curious, right? They could do some Zoom coaching to have a deeper understanding of their own relationship. Clients who feel like they're on the precipice, that they think their use is a problem, but they're not positive and they want to sort of get, I think they're hoping a lot of times for you to be like, no, you don't need any help. But a lot of times that is not the case. And then people, of course, who are absolutely totally addicted and they know it, because again, as a psychotherapist and a solo practitioner, and it's also not as much as I know plenty about addiction, I always feel like somebody who really has the experience, the ins and the outs. You've been sober yourself for 33 years. It's like you know all the tricks of the trade, but you also have helped clients of mine who it never entered my mind that they could really get sober. I mean, one in particular, many, many years ago, comes to mind, where I thought this person was kind of hopeless. And I remember being so enthused that you were able to help them. But the psychoeducation, Patty, that's a piece of what you do that, and I know this because you've helped people in my family. Like it isn't just that we're friends, and it isn't just that we're professional colleagues, and we are all of those things, but that firsthand, you've lessened the suffering for me and my family by helping someone that I love very much get through a really rough relapse with addiction. So I just wanted to really bring you back on the show, because what you do is so important and it's so accessible. The way that you do it, right? There's lots of ways that people do it, but the way that you do it, it makes it very accessible. So I'm hoping anyone who's listening, anyone who's watching, who is struggling, they can get in touch with you and do some kind of an informational, 20-minute call, and they can fill something out to see if they would be appropriate to coach with you. Because the suffering that most people do, in my experience, Patty, with addiction, we suffer for a really long time before we reach out. And the same thing with folks who love addicts. There's a lot of information that you could learn from a sober coach, even if you are not the one with the addiction, that would help you actually support your person in getting clean.
One thing that came to me while you were speaking is that one thing about addiction, alcoholism, saying you're an addict or an alcoholic or however you identify, it doesn't matter what anybody else in the world says or how much evidence they think they have to prove that you are. If you don't believe you are, anything you do is just going to be a Band-Aid that's going to come off. It's just temporary. When in your heart, you know that the way you feel keeps coming back to, maybe it's the whatever you take. Maybe if that was gone, I'd feel different, and it keeps coming back. Now, you could pop into my life and start doing this and then disappear and come back a year later. Like, just because you have that revelation doesn't always mean you're ready. Now, people who are like so clearly their life's unmanageable, DUIs, overdoses, whatever, everything's collapsed and it's so obvious, they have just as much of a difficult time maintaining any length of sobriety. Like, just because you need it doesn't mean you get it. Like, getting sober is the easy part. Staying sober through all the things that happen in life is the challenge. That's why you accumulate tools and get to know yourself and your responses and build some type of little support network of people who don't judge you, that you can express how you feel without having to have it all together. If you're the boss and everyone in your life is on your payroll, you are never going to get honest with any of them when it comes to the real private stuff, that's going on inside. So it puts you in a situation like a handicap on getting the kind of help you need. Sometimes you need to go where people don't know you. And so if you're coming in, with shadow addiction, or maybe it's just circumstantial, it doesn't mean it's going to be an easy ride to maintain it. Like I said, people will come in like that and be gung-ho and 2 weeks later just disappear, or 2 months later when they think, well, see, there's all this evidence that maybe I'm not really an alcoholic because it's been so easy. And then at day 75, they drink. They can't even get to the 90 days, so it's just a learning curve, and being forgiving with yourself. It's like you try, you learn a little bit about yourself, and maybe you discover some truths about your relationship to substances that you'd rather not be true, and then you give it another try. Or maybe you go, oh yeah, this really was circumstantial, and I had a break and I know how to manage my feelings a little bit better, and I'm making conscious decisions. I'm not just having a drink to not feel lonely in this moment. Recognizing your choices, I think. And for family members, just a quick one, for anybody who might be listening, who has somebody that you have lost sleep over, that you've cried over, that you prayed over, that you've been worried about, and now they've agreed to go to rehab, just know they're not coming home fixed. This is just the beginning of an ongoing journey for them. And I think a lot of people will throw money at something and think the outcome is going to be, they're going to be how they were before this problem existed in our lives. And they're going to come home and they're going to be fragile, and they're going to need support, and they're going to need support outside of the family as well. It's good to give people a little bit of room to recover, and to keep encouraging them to, not follow them around like a codependent, and what are you doing? Who did you call? Just become their sponsor and their therapist and their everything. But just know that they do need to be able to have the space to take care of their recovery. Because sometimes people get resentful, like you were in the bar every night and now you have to be gone to be in a meeting. I've waited for you long enough. That's going to make that person feel like they have to make a choice. They're going to choose you because they're going to feel guilty, but then they're going to drink, and then it's going to be worse.
Right. I think that part of what we're talking about, though, is that when somebody gets sober, it disrupts the homeostasis in the family system. And so what we're actually talking about is that there's going to be a period of time where you're figuring out what the new normal is going to be. And this is why people who love addicts need to do their own work, because we've been most likely codependently enabling in some way. What do we say? Alcoholics don't have relationships, they take hostages. You love someone who's addicted to something, and it can be incredibly painful. And we both know this firsthand, and I'm sure many, many, many people listening and watching do too. But getting educated, learning about how you can really support someone, if it isn't you, but it's someone that you love, it's so important in understanding what is enabling and what isn't enabling. So tell people where they can find you, Patty Powers.
My website is Patty with a Y, pattypowersnyc.com. And there's an email link. It's patty@pattypowersnyc.com. And if you reach out to me, I'm always happy to respond. And, if there's questions, I'll do my best to respond that way. And if it goes further, usually I have a questionnaire, because I won't ever work with someone where it's a very low level of support when they need a high level of support. And sometimes people believe they need a low level of support because they have this amnesia.
Right.
They believe that what they're telling me in terms of how much they're consuming or how often is true, but they don't realize that they're talking about 1986. Like, it hasn't been true since then. So, it's
Right.
like the questionnaire, so I can kind of gauge, and then we speak and see if, something works. And if it's not me, I can make recommendations to other avenues for people to take,
Right
and
on.
always good to respond to email.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for being here. I super appreciate all that you do, all that you've done for me, for my family, but also what you're putting out there in the world. You guys check out pattypowersnyc.com if you want more information about sober coaching, recovery, all the things that you need to know to have less suffering and more joy in this life. Thanks again, Patty.